Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Gittin Daf 83, and we have learned in the Mishnah that there was a dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. If a man says to his wife, "Harei l'teras l'kol adam elo laponi," you're permitted to every man except for to so and so, what would be the halacha? So Rabbi Eliezer is in the position that that's a valid get, and she's permitted to everyone except for to that man. Whereas Rabbanan saying in those circumstances, it's not a valid get. So the Gemara says, Rabbanan, the Brisa says, Achar Ptiraso, Shal Rabbi Eliezer, after Rabbi Eliezer died, Nechtensu Arba Sekanim Shivad Varav. 4 elders came to challenge him. And who are these 4 elders? Elohain, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. Those are the 4 elders who came to challenge him after Rabbi Eliezer died. So they wanted to challenge Rabbi Eliezer, and they said it should not be a get. Comes along the Gemara, says that the first one was Rabbi Tarfon. So then at Rabbi Tarfon, we'll see even though it's 4, it's really 5 because Rabbi Akiva has 2 answers, two questions against Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Tarfon responded and he said, first of all, we know Sharei Hol Chazu B'Nises L'Acham Shalzeh. Let's say the woman we're talking about, let's call her Sarah. So let's say Sarah goes and marries, Reuven says, you can't marry Shimon. You can marry everybody except for Shimon. So she goes and marries Levi. And then Levi dies without any children. So now we see Reuven, by making this stipulation, has uprooted something from the Torah. So we see from here, it's not a get. So that's his reputation of Rabbi Eliezer. And then Rabbi Yossi Aglili gives another explanation. He says, it says, where do we find that it's prohibited for this one and permitted for this one? Where else do we find in the Torah that something can be prohibited to one and permitted to another? If this woman is prohibited to everybody, she's permitted to some, she's prohibited to everyone. She's permitted to some, she should be permitted to everyone. This is not a krisis. Third approach, this is Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Amar says, krisis davar akoris beino beino. That's something that's a severance between him and her. By him holding on and saying she can't do this, it's not a severance. Then Rabbi Akiva gives the 4th answer. Let's say this woman goes and marries somebody from the marketplace. Let's say this woman goes, she marries somebody else. Okay, she can't marry Shimon. She goes marries Levi, and then after she marries this 3rd person, she has children and from him, and then she's widowed or divorced. And then she goes back and marries the woman, the one she had been prohibited to. Now you're going to say that retroactively. The children from Levi, who she married before she married Shimon, she married when she was still allowed to marry Levi. Now those children were going to say Mamzerim. So this it can't be. So this can't be a krisis. That's not the Torah would never say a krisis that causes somebody to be a mamzer. That's what Rashi says. Davar Acha. Rabbi Akiva gives a 2nd answer. Let's say Reuben says you can't marry Aaron, and he's a Kohen, Umeis Hamagarish, and then the person who is divorcing her, i.e. Reuben, he dies. Onim says Amana Etzlov Agusha Eitzakol Adam. She can't then go marry Aaron because she'll say, well, vis-a-vis you, I'm a widow, even though vis-a-vis everybody else, I'm a divorcee. Since she was a divorcee from everybody else, she can't marry Aaron. The Kava Chomer, and we'll make a Kava Chomer from there to the first case. Ma Grusha Sheikawa Surah. The Shviltza Gerushin Shabbat, just like a divorcee, and it's just a regular prohibition, so it's a kawa, so it's a light prohibition. We're going to say she's prohibited because of the count that she has this Sad Gerushin Shabbat, because of the count that vis-a-vis everybody else, she's a divorcee. Ish, a married woman, she chamura, we'll call shekain. So if she's married to everybody else except for to this person, for sure she should be prohibited to everybody else because of the aspect of her that's still married. So we see from here that this is not a krisis, that this can't be a divorce. So after they said this, Rabbi Yeshua responds, that we don't respond to the lion after his death. And Rashi explains, if he would be alive, maybe he'll be able to give to you a good answer. So if somebody is not, you don't respond to the lion after his death. After his death, very powerful idea. When that first of all, they refer to the person who's dead as the lion, and second of all, you have to give the person a chance. Amarava v'kulu islu pircha v'varmid Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah. He says, Rava says, I could really, all of these questions against Rebbe Eliezer, they have a challenge to them, and we could break their questions, except for Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah, who says that the reason why it's not valid is because it has to be Davar HaKoris Beino Aveina. Indeed, I'm Rabbi Yossi Roani is to Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah says, I see the position of Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah more than all of them. So that's indeed what Rabbi Yossi says. So then the Gemara says, Amar Mar. So let's analyze what's the questions on all these positions. Then the Rabbi Tarfon Amar Aresha Alchazu Benisas Acham Shazash Nasr Level Baseball Banam Limtis Okre Devim Minator. So now what's the question? Again, what was Rabbi Tarfon's approach? He says, well, now she can't do Yibum. Now this person can't do Yibum with her if she goes and marries Shimon's brother. Shimon was prohibited. Turned out she can't, and Levi, and then Levi dies. She can't do Levi, which she can't do Yibum with Shimon anymore. So therefore, Reuben, by divorcing her in this manner, has uprooted something from the Torah. So the Gemara says, okay, he's uprooting it. Walker, he didn't uproot it. Who mean to say he's not the one who uprooted her? Meaning to say it became uprooted. That when Levi married her and then Levi died, that became uprooted. But he didn't uproot it by just saying she can't marry Shimon. Okay, so he's he's stipulating to uproot something with Torah. The Gemara says Masna. He's not stipulating. He didn't say to her, you have to marry Levi, who's the brother of Shimon, who you can't marry. That doesn't make sense. He didn't make that stipulation. So he's causing something to be uprooted from the Torah. Because by making this clause and she can't marry him, so he's causing it to be uprooted. So the Gemara says, Gorem, if that's the case, El Me'ata, then we should never be allowed to marry somebody who he can't do Yibum as a result. He shouldn't be allowed to marry the daughter of his brother. Shema Yamas Boabonim. He shouldn't be allowed to marry his niece, which we know from elsewhere in the Talmud is a mitzvah, because maybe he'll end up dying without any children, and he'll have to. And under those circumstances, he's causing something to be uprooted from the Torah. So therefore, we said, I know Pircha. So this is indeed why Rabbi Tarfon's question on Rebbe Eliezer is problematic, because there are other situations where we uproot something from the Torah, where a marriage makes it so that you can't do Yibum, the possibility of Yibum, and we still allow that marriage. Now the Gemara says, before we leave the question of Rabbi Tarfon, the Gemara wants to know, how does Rabbi Tarfon, which case is Rabbi Tarfon discussing? And what we're talking about is as follows. And when Rabbi Eliezer says in our Mishnah, said that he says you're divorced from everybody, Elalaponi, does that mean except Chutz Miponi? Or that you can marry everybody except for that man? Or on the condition that you don't marry that man? And so if we had, the Gemara had explained, if we had said except for, then in the case of the condition, even the Rabbana would say it's a vow of marriage. But if we say that it's arguing about, and it's in a case of Amanas, then in the case of except, even Rabbi Eliezer would say it's not valid. So which case is Rabbi Tarfon assume that this discussion our Mishnah is referring to? That's what the Gemara asks. Ubemai. Which case is Rabbi Tarfon referring to? If it's a case of where he says except for, then Mishra Shara Rabbi Eliezer, then actually Rabbi Eliezer, then under those circumstances, we would say under those circumstances that Rabbi Eliezer would say actually that if she married Levi, she would really be able to do Yibum with his brother, because Rabbi Eliezer says that if you marry somebody else in between, the condition of chutz no longer applies. The Tanya Moder Rabbi Eliezer and Megarish Ishta, that Rabbi Eliezer himself would admit, if he divorces his wife and he says, with exception, except for this man, and she goes and marries somebody else, and then she's widowed or divorced, that she becomes permitted to this man that she was prohibited to. So it must be the Rabbi Tarfon says that the dispute is Baal Manas, because if it was a case of Chutz, she would be allowed to do Yibum. And that's the question on Rabbi Tarfon, and now we establish where Rabbi Tarfon is referring to. Then Rabbi Yossi Aglili responds and says, I'll tell you, how did Rabbi Yossi Aglili understand this dispute? He said, because he says if she's going to be prohibited to one, she's prohibited to all. If she's permitted to one, she's permitted to all. So he doesn't accept Rabbi Eliezer's approach. Gemara says, well, really? Once you're prohibited to one, you're prohibited to all. The truma is the food of the Kohen. She can't eat it if it's prohibited to Kohanim. Mutaris was that, and it's permitted to not. It's prohibited to non Kohanim. It's permitted to Kohanim. So what do you mean if it's prohibited to one, it's prohibited to all? So Gemara says no, but Isha coming. No, we're talking about a case of a prohibition of a woman. One she's prohibited to one, she's prohibited to all. The Gemara says Arayos. What about the relatives? They're like, for example, one's mother, one's sister. They're prohibited to the son and the brother, but they're permitted to everybody else. The Gemara says no, but Isha's coming in. No, we're talking about marriage. All right, Isha's ish. What about a married woman? Every married woman, she's permitted to her husband, she's prohibited to everybody else. Well, I don't pircha. That's the question of Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What case is Rabbi Yossi Aglili referring to? If you want to say it's on the condition that you don't marry this person, it can't be. Hare Hutra et Slobiznus, because that's because in the case of Almanas, we're saying on the condition you don't marry this man, but you are allowed to be with him from the perspective of the husband in a non-marriage relationship. So it must be that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is saying to Chutz, that he says you're divorced to everybody except to this man, in which case it would apply even to his nus relationship. And so therefore that's the situation that Rabbi Yossi Aglili is referring to, a case of Chutz. So then Rabbi Akiva, we're skipping Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah because he says that Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, there's no question on him. So we go to Rabbi Akiva. Remember, Rabbi Akiva himself gave two explanations. So the first explanation, the first question Rabbi Akiva had on Rabbi Eliezer said, so Rabbi Akiva says, well, if she went and married somebody else in between, and then she goes and violates the condition of the get, then you're going to say that the children from the second marriage are mamzerin, and that's a problem. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, by all conditions, she shouldn't be allowed to marry somebody else, because maybe she'll marry somebody else, and then she won't fulfill the condition. Like you're divorced on the condition you don't drink wine, and then let's say she marries somebody else and then drinks the wine, and then her children are mamzerin, and so hainu pircha. So that's indeed a question of Rabbi Eliezer from Rabbi Akiva, because then all conditions should never be allowed to be a valid get. What's Rabbi Akiva talking about? If it's a case of, with the exception of this person, well, Misha Shor Rabbi Eliezer, we know that if she married somebody in between, Rabbi Eliezer would say that the chutz clause goes away. The Tanya Moda Rabbi Eliezer and Garish's sister, so we said specifically that Rabbi Eliezer says if she married somebody in between, the prohibition of marrying the chutz person, the chutz man, falls away. So it must be we're talking about a case of almanas. Davar acher. So according to this approach, Rabbi Akiva says says the dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbanan is a case of almanas. Alternatively, Rabbi Akiva gave another answer. Kohen umeisa megarish, that if the one who she's prohibited to was a Kohen and then he dies, she can't then marry this man because this man who was a Kohen, by saying, well, I'm vis-a-vis you, I'm an almana, vis-a-vis everybody else, I'm a divorcee. But we say that the aspect of her that's divorced prohibits her from marrying the Kohen. And if she's prohibited from the aspect of the divorcee to marry this man who's a Kohen, so for sure she should be prohibited to marry everybody else in general, because she's still considered a married man to her husband, because she's still prohibited to this man. So the Gemara says, Ubamai, and what's he referring to in that case? What's Rabbi Akiva referring to in this case? If you want to say he's referring to a case of almanas, on the condition you don't marry this man, Hare Grusha she's still going to be prohibited to this man because she was a divorcee. Meaning to say, Hara grusha etzlo b'znus, meaning to say, look at Rashi. Hara lo asra alav ella linase. She's only prohibited to marry this Kohen. Avo is nos grusha etzlo miyah, but she is a divorcee vis-a-vis him with respect to his nus. Hilkachim yamas ba'arishon. So therefore, if the husband will die, the first husband, she's still considered a divorcee against the first man because she was always a divorcee. And so therefore, there's no kal v'chomer because she was always a divorcee vis-a-vis this man who she was not allowed to marry because vis-a-vis, if he would have been mezana with her, she would have been a divorcee. So it must be we're talking about a case of bechutz, that she was divorced to everybody else, but for this man, she would have been a widow. So the Gemara says, okay, so in this case, Rabbi Akiva says that we're talking about a case of bechutz, but in the first case, he said we're talking about a case of amanas. So the Gemara says that doesn't make sense. Rabbi Akiva's first answer is amanas. The second case is bechutz. Which one is Rabbi Akiva opinion of? He gives the first opinion is about amanas, and the second opinion is basically on the assumption that it's chutz. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Akiva shmiel the ikadam chutz ikadam amanas. Rabbi Akiva heard that some people say chutz and some people say amanas, and so therefore, ma'andam chutz hai pircha, ma'andam amanas hai pircha. So the one who says chutz, he has a question, and the one who says amanas, we have a question against him. But the Gemara has said, but what's the question in the case of the second one of chutz? We challenged Rabbi Akiva's first point because we said that, what was the challenge to the first one? Because then Rabbi Akiva is not going to say any case of a tanai should not be acceptable. But what's the case? What's the challenge to Rabbi Akiva's answer about the Kohen? What was the davar acher? What's the challenge on that? Umay pircha. And if you want to say, if you want to say, well, the question is, don't bring the kal v'chomer from the fact that the prohibition of the Kohen is different because the Kohen has extra mitzvahs, so you can't bring a kal v'chomer from a Kohen to a married woman in general. Rabbi Eliezer, but Rabbi Eliezer himself learned it out from Iser Kahuna. And look at this is a reference to what we said on 82b, where Rashi reminds us, Migrusha Mishalav Hadash Psula Kahuna. Rabbi Eliezer himself learns out from the fact that she be permitted from the fact that it says in the case of a grusha from a Kohen that he just has to be divorced from the husband himself, and so therefore you can't. It would be a valid kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says, well, Rabba Yanai Mishim Zakin Echad Kamasi. Rabba said that wasn't the answer that Rabba gave to explain Rabbi Eliezer. He explained Rabbi Eliezer like the other answer that was given to explain Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Yanai had given in the name of a Zakin Echad on Pei Beis Amid Beis, that it was the Yatzim Beis of V'Holcha V'Haisel Ishacher. So that was the source for Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabba, not from the case of the pasuk with respect to Kohen. So now comes along Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said, Rabbi Yeshua said, we don't answer the lion after he's dead. You want to say that Rabbi Yeshua agrees with Rabbi Eliezer that she would be permitted to marry if she was divorced in this manner. Rabbi Yeshua himself has a question against Rabbi Eliezer. So the Gemara says, you're right. This is what Rabbi Yeshua was saying to the four giants, Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Glili, and Rabbi Yossi Glili, Rabbi Tar from Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. This is what he said to them. He said, I also have a question on them. But listen, both according to me and according to you, you don't respond to the lion after he's dead. Because if he would have been here, he would have known what to respond. So what was the question from Rabbi Yeshua against Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanya Amar Rabbi Yeshua says, we have a price there. Rabbi Yeshua says, we have to compare before she marries the second man to what it was like before she married the first one. Just like before she married the first guy, she didn't have any ties to any other man. She can't have any ties to any other man. And so therefore she can't be connected or tied to any other man before she gets married. And so clearly I don't agree with you, Rabbi Eliezer. So Gufa, so the Gemara says, Mod Rabbi Eliezer from Megarish Ishto, so we learned this earlier. This is the brisa that we cited, that Rabbi Eliezer, even so she says she's allowed to be remarried, he would admit that if he divorces his wife and he says you're permitted to everybody except for this person, so Rabbi Eliezer would admit that if he says you're permitted to everyone except for this man Shimon, and then she went to marry Levi, then the prohibition against Shimon goes away. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar tshuva with different Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar responded to Rabbi Eliezer's answer. And he says, I don't understand that analysis that you're making. So according to your analysis now, Levi is allowing this woman to marry Shimon. Where do we see that a third party does something to allow a second party to be able to marry? Marry Yavama Debal Oser, the Yavamatir. We know, so the Gemara says, what do you mean? I'll give you a perfect example. Yavama, what about the case of Yavama? A woman who falls to Yibum, the Baos, her initial husband prohibits her to marry anybody else in the marketplace. The Yavam, and then his brother, by doing chalitza with her, allows her to marry people. The Gemara says, yeah, Hasam Yavam who kasor. The one who prohibits her is not the husband, but the husband's brother. The imival hashari avakaima, because if he would have relations with her, then she would be allowed. So it's clear that the initial husband is not the one who's prohibiting her; it's the husband's brother. The Gemara says, what about Nidarim? The Noder also matir, that the one who makes the vow is prohibited, and then the Chacham come in and annuls the vow. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, no, the Chacham's not annulling the vow. You're really annulling the vow. En Chacham matir klum, el b'charata. Really, you, when you regret the vow, you're the one who's releasing the vow. The Chacham himself is not doing it. So the Gemara says, Harei afaras abal. The Isha Noderes. What about the rejection of the vow by the rejection of the vow that the woman makes the vow, the Baal Mefer, and then the husband rejects the vow? The Gemara says, Hasam Kedur Pinchas Mishmei Derava. No, there it's not really the case that the husband is annulling the wife's vow, but from the beginning it was set up like that. Pinchas Mishmei Derava Kohen Oderes Adas following Noderes. From the beginning, she only made the vow with the husband's consent, and he's just demonstrating that he doesn't consent. So therefore, this is the question that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar responds to Rabbi Eliezer. Then Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, he says, it has to be something, the divorce has to be something that completely separates between him and her. So the Gemara says, and he says, so therefore this is not a divorce. The Gemara says, Rabbanan high krisus, my abdilay. So if that's the case, the other Rabbanan, who didn't give Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah's answer, i.e. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Tarfon, and Rabbi Akifa, what's their issue with this krisus? Why don't they say this perfectly good answer of Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah? So the Gemara explains, they use this word krisus for the following price. And this is your get. On the condition you don't drink wine, on the condition that you don't ever go to your father's home. That's not a divorce. It has to be a clause which has an end to it. But if he says, Shloshim Yom, on the condition you don't drink wine for 30 days, that is a krisus. Harei is a krisus. So that's what the other Rabbanan say. V'idach, and how does Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah know that idea? Mikares krisus not. But he learns it out from the fact that it could have said sefer kares, but it says krisus, that's where he learns that law. V'idach, and the other Rabbanan, kares krisus lo darshi. They don't expound those words of kares krisus. Amar Rava, harei ze giteach. So Rava says, let's say, he says, this is your divorce. On the condition you don't drink wine all the days of my life. That's not a divorce. We'll see. Well, the Gemara is going to reject that in a moment. But all the days of, let's say, this other person's life, then it is a valid divorce. Well, the Gemara asks, what's it? Why, if he says my life is not a divorce? Excuse me. Why, if he says the life of somebody else, is it a divorce? Because maybe he'll die and then it's possible that the condition could be fulfilled. But he himself, maybe he'll die and the condition will be fulfilled. If he says all the days of your life you don't drink wine, and then it's not a divorce because the condition can never be fulfilled. and make it, and in order to say that it's for sure a get. But if it's all the days of my life and the life of so and so, then it is a divorce. So Rava asked the question from Rav Nachman. He says, Hayom iyata ishti. If he says, he gives her again, he says to her, today itself will be a divorce, and tomorrow will not be a divorce. The shir begita, he left over something with the get. He's not completely divorcing her. So what will be the halacha under those circumstances? Tibaylo Rabbi Eliezer, Tibaylo Rabbanan. It's a question both of Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. Tibaylo Rabbi Eliezer. It's a question of Rabbi Eliezer who says in the case of chutz, it's a valid get. Rabbi Eliezer Hasam Eladon the Kashari Loam, because there to the woman, to the man, to the people where he's permitting her to, he's permitting her forever. But here in this case, he's not permitting her forever. He's just permitting her for one day. Maybe there's no distinction. Tibaylo Rabbanan. It's a question according to Rabbanan. Adkam will come Rabbanan Hasam. Why did Rabbanan say in that case, case of chutz, she's prohibited because it's not a valid get to a paska because he's not completely severing himself from her. The paska, since he's separating from her forever, therefore we're going to say keeping the paska. In this case, she's separated from everybody in the world, and so therefore she will no longer be his wife until he goes back and remarries her, and so therefore it's not a valid condition, and it's a completely valid get. So the Gemara says, "Basar Debaye." After he asks this question, how they're prostrate, then he answers it. Mistaber, it's logical. Bein Rabbi Eliezer, Bein Rabbanan, I'm keeping the paska. That one, she's that since he says you're not divorced from me, you divorced from me today, but not tomorrow. Then he's established that she's separated from him completely, and then it's a valid divorce, and he'd have to go back and remarry her again. So that's how Tosfos explains it. This is today's beautiful, beautiful daf. The Shekoyach to everyone.